Hey everybody, good evening. Here we are, session 12 for the Joy of Coding here at Portland State University. Thanks for coming out and engaging on a super chilly night. Um, it's actually I'm kind of glad that we don't have class tomorrow because it sounds like we're supposed to get some snow or something. It'll be a mess. But let's see here. Tonight we are going to break ground on Project 5. So Project 5 is the REST API project with the client and the server, and it's really a different beast than the first couple of projects. Yeah, there's still a command line aspect to it, but there's a whole lot more. And because it's so different, you start over with a new Maven project. So my goal for tonight is to walk you through creating that Maven project, and I encourage folks who can to play along at home, and we'll have the recording here going so that you can go back and review it. But I want to make sure that as many people as possible can get their environment for Project 5 set up, and then, of course, knowledge that you'll put it aside for a little while you finish off Project 4. But before that, I want to start out with Prime Minister's questions. What can I tell you? People were working on and finishing up Project 3. How'd you find it? Any questions remain? How did it compare to the first couple of projects? What was the same? What was different? Thumbs up. What does a thumbs up mean? Good. Good. Yeah. Good. That's pulled out a lot of hair in my day. Good. I'm glad that it seemed a little bit more straightforward. I see that as a sign that you're learning and getting more comfortable with the environment and Java and sort of, yep, you already implemented one airline dumper, so a second one is a little bit more familiar. Pretty good. Anything in particular that was tricky or maybe took you a little to get over? Anything that was tough there? Shut up.
Replacing the string date times with local date time methods.
Yeah.
I feel like I didn't have a solid way of doing it incrementally.
Great observation. Right. So it's like you had to do kind of a refactoring. If it was, and it wasn't like refactoring the code easier to read. It was like I had to now there's a new requirement. You've got to use the local datetime object. Yeah, and so probably a lot of places where you just like been passing strings through or done string validation, yet you'd go touch every one of those places, modify it to use the local datetime. Yeah, good. Yeah, and I think that's not surprising to me that that was kind of tricky, or that was probably things were broken for a little while. You had to put them back together again. Yep. Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, I bet a lot of the changes. Tests had to change too. Yeah. Good. Yeah. Good. Pretty much pretty straightforward, but then okay. Well, that's an interesting lesson now, isn't it? Yeah. That like the well, it's like you've already all gotten comfortable enough with Java now that some more Java APIs, learning how to format dates and making things look reasonable is pretty straightforward. But yeah, then just sort of um, the change, the surgery they have to do, and the blast radius of changing something is pretty fundamental to projects 1 and 2, like the format of the date and time. Nice. Okay, that's okay. Good to know. Thanks for weighing in on that, Nathan. Cool. Okay. Anybody thought about Project 4? Any of the XML stuff? Hmm. Great. Oh, is it like one of my classes? Probably, yeah, probably from like the family application or something like that. Right. Yeah, that's right. It's all there for your right. Yeah. So actually, that's and yeah, okay. So there is maybe I haven't mentioned it yet in the assignments, but yeah. So in the sample code, which is up in my repository, so not like my like it's this one here. It's the source code repository. So it's just, oops, let me hide that. It's just the Joy of Coding one. What is it called? It's just the Joy of Coding PDX Joy of Coding. This has like all sorts of things, including this family application, which has things like, yeah, this is probably where the pretty printer is. Okay, yeah. I don't know how pretty it is, or, well, that wasn't it. Okay. Well, anyway, this is another example of some how you might how you could pretty print some stuff. Although I'm guessing that most of you probably didn't need it. You're pretty accustomed to it by now. But I think where it might come in handy, is it this one? No, it's probably the web example code. Like for project 5, the family tree servlet. Oops, those are integration tests. Main servlets. Yeah, okay, so like here's an example of the family tree servlet and how to do things. Well, we'll see stuff like this tonight. But yeah, there is, this code is out there for you to explore, for you to take inspiration from. Maybe that's being a little too lofty. Or at least, yeah, or at least laugh at. Sorry, what was that? Oh, interesting. Okay, actually, now I'm curious. Now I want to go look. Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's probably not something that is even vaguely related. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. With Java Foundation classes. Okay. Yeah, that's wild. Let's. Oh yeah, look at that. It's creating some XML. Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I recommend that you use the DOM APIs, but I'm not gonna know. Actually, as long as it conforms to DTD, it is okay by me. That's pretty wild. Yeah. I wonder what. No documentation though. Gosh, not very useful. Of course, it is like an internal JDK class, so nice. Sorry? No, that wasn't much of a sidetrack at all. Cool. Okay. Well, good deal. Okay. Let's see here. We also had some projects and stuff due tonight. Oops. Or we had. That's March. Here we go. Right. Oh yeah. I had the reflections in the pair programming. Where everybody got that in, plus the midterm survey. Um, awesome. Okay. Anything else for Prime Minister's questions? Anything else I can tell you? Anything else on you? Okay. Let's start on project 5. Okay. So in projects 1 through 4, you wrote a command line application. This is probably similar to the things that you've done in other classes, in that you have a code that starts with a main method, right? And it goes off in dozens with the command line, which may or may not be new to you. And then it calls other code, and then eventually all that other code returns, and you come back to your main method, and you return, and that's it. And this is, the way, well, actually all programs, really work this way. They must, they start up someplace, and then eventually they exit through through some means. Maybe they error out because there's an uncaught exception, or maybe they just exit nicely. In project 5, yeah, you've got command line program. But what that command line program does is it interacts with a web service, with a REST API that runs in a long-running Java program called a web container. And so then I'm not going to go into too much detail about it tonight, but please be sure to watch or read over this Foundations of the Web screencast, because it explains to you the foundations. It explains to you what Java web containers are, what web applications are, what this Jetty thing is. You'll see examples of it tonight, but I'm not going to go into a tremendous amount of detail. And it also talks about the Servlet API. You'll see an example of it, but I think to understand it conceptually, please refer back to the slides. So you have all this other stuff in your project additionally, in addition to the command line application. And so then what you're doing here is writing a RESTful service for your um, airline application. So you'll be using a lot of the same classes, but some new ones also. So the web application itself is driven by something called an airline servlet. And so this airline servlet provides the REST access to an airline, actually several airlines. So in this project, you'll be working with multiple airlines. And what a servlet does is it, well, serves up content for a URL. And so then, as we'll see, when you run the servlet inside a web container, inside Jetty is the name of the web container that we use, you'll have some URLs that you can hit, and it'll return stuff. And actually, I think what I'll do here is sort of dive into the code and go back and forth between the code and the assignment. Might make a little bit more sense that way. But the whole idea is that you've got an application that has some URLs that it supports, and you interact with your airline, or rather, the client interacts with the airline through these URLs. And depending on which HTTP verb you use, like get or post, the servlet will respond accordingly and take some actions. So for instance, if you have a URL like this and you send it a HTTP GET, it'll return some information about the airline. And the wire format that it uses, the format of the airline it sends back, is formatted as XML. So here you'll use your XML dumper from Project 4 to then format the data back to the client of this URL. And there's also a Project 5 class. It's got a command line. We'll look at that after we sort of get a better understanding of the pieces parts here. And because this has the airline servlet, it requires a new Maven project. I think that's where I want to go next. Yeah, but then I'll get back to this diagram right here. Okay, so we need to create a new Maven project. There'll be a new create script. Of course, all those must be run on the CS department's machines. So I'm going to go to Joy of, oops. Oh, no, it's my D. Whitlock. Okay, David Whitlock. Joy of Coding, Winter 2025. Let's make sure I'm on main. I'll do a git pull to make sure that I have, oops. Cool. I'll do a git pull. Yep, I had some new stuff. Cool. Now, okay, so there is a create REST API project script. Let's also create a new Maven project. Now, we haven't done this in a while, right? We did this for Project 1, and then I did it for the koans too. But it's been a while since you've run the script. So this creates a new Maven project. So now if I do a git status, I'll see I've got a modified pom.xml because I've added a new subproject called airline-web. So now I'm going to add the pom.xml and the airline-web to my Git repository. Now when I do status, I've got a whole bunch more new files, including things like the Maven wrapper that we've seen before. And then we have, look, we have integration tests, we have main code, we have unit tests, so lots of things we're familiar with. But then if you look at some of these classes, there are some things that we haven't seen yet, like the airline servlet and oh, there is a Project 5 main class, so this is good. There's also something called an airline REST client. There are more pieces parts to get you started. So more so in Project 1, I wanted to provide a skeleton application that allows us to explore and learn about the whole REST API can be used from a command line program. So things work out of the box, and really the challenge here is to take that application and morph it, refactor it, into your airline application. But we're going to walk through all of this stuff tonight to give you an idea of what everything is. I'm going to commit these, but before I pull it onto my machine, let's see here, added airline web application. I'm going to CD into the airline web. I'm just going to make sure that everything works by running Maven clean verify. So this Maven project is different because it has more pieces parts, where the projects 1, 2, 3, and 4 all had, you create an executable jar that runs your program. Um, Project 5 also has an executable jar, but in addition, it has all the stuff for the web application. The biggest difference, like conceptually, between the first projects and Project 5 is that now it's a distributed program. You have two processes talking to each other. You have two Java virtual machines talking with each other. You have the long-lived web server, and then you have a command line program that comes and goes. And what we're working with is both of these programs, and we'll see not only how to develop them, but more importantly, how to test them, because there's some testing techniques that fit really nicely with the Servlet API, with the web application. In particular, if you look at the, I'm going to log out of here. If you look at the other um, the other screencast for this week, it's all about testing with mock objects, and this will come in really handy with Project 5. There's some kind of advanced concepts in here. You see this API called Mockito that allows you to mock things out. Don't know if I'm going to get to that tonight or not, but it lets you test in a unique way that fits really well with web application. But don't want to get ahead of myself. Okay, so I am going to let's see here. Yes, it is this this directory. So I'll do my git pull over here. And oh no, I didn't push from PSU, did I? Forgot about that. Git push. Type my password. Okay, good. It yep. Push some stuff. I'll do a pull over here on my local machine. Oh, I've got some changes. Oh, what did I? How did I change my pom.xml? Hopefully I made some formatting changes. I'm just gonna forget about that. What can I say? Git checkout. I just don't have git restore on this one. Pom.xml status. Nothing's changed. Yeah, I'm not gonna bother. I'm trying to run it, so I'm gonna do a pull. I got all my changes for my Airline web application, so I'm going to go into Airline web and just make sure it works. And here again, if you're following along at home, I recommend do the same before you make any changes, before you try to do anything too fancy. Just make sure it works on your system. I expect that it will, but you know, please let me know if something doesn't work for you. And again, doing Maven Clean Verify builds the entire project, and it does the same thing that it did with your other projects in that it. What that message was all about. In that it will compile your tests, so compile your code, compile your tests, run your unit tests. It will build the artifacts. In this case, in addition to the executable jar file, it builds something called a WAR file, a web archive, that contains the application that gets deployed to Jetty, the web container. And then it runs your integration tests. And as we'll see, the integration tests do a lot more than they did in the first couple of projects. Instead of just running the main method, they actually start up the web application, run tests that interact with the web application to verify that the web application behaves as expected, like in a real environment. So it's cool. Okay, that was all successful. Awesome. Okay. Now, I'm going to have two terminals going here because I'm going to be running multiple programs at the same time. Over here on the, this is PSU. Yeah, here it is. Go back to Airline Web. Okay, nice. Yeah. Yeah, sure, yeah.
It's been a while since we pulled in from the repo. We're Bitcoin without those registered.
Yep.
And we're going to run the REST project, right?
Yeah, from the PSU machine.
From the PSU machine.
Yep.
And then we're going to put it
No. Okay, yeah, sorry. This is in your own repo. So I'm doing. Okay, yeah, right. You're right. It's been okay. It's been a couple of weeks. Yeah. Since we worked with this. So remember, unlike the Kata repository, which everybody shares the Kata repository, right? Everybody's fingers on it. Okay, and then each one of us has a Joy of Coding Winter 2025, including myself. Mine's public, yours is private. So yeah. So when following along at home in your private Joy of Coding Winter 2025 repository or whatever it is that you called it, please log on to the PSU machine, run the create script. I think these steps are outlined in the assignment someplace. Let's see here. Create rest. Yes. Yep. Yep. Lots of good repositories. Right. So basically, yeah, wherever you did your project 4, that's where you create your project 5. Yep. So yep. Again, in your Joy of Coding Winter 2025, which is where you do your projects, right? The projects 1 through 4. Log into the PSU machine, run the create REST API script, run Maven W clean verify to make sure everything works, and then commit it and push it to GitHub, and then pull down those changes into your local machine or whatever machine that you develop on. It is possible to develop this on the PSU machines, but it's not very nice. Okay. Okay. So as I said, there are 2 parts. There are basically 2 programs that you run in parallel, and they talk to each other. The first one is the web server, the web container is what it's called, which is essentially a web server that runs web applications that are implemented in Java. And there is this standard for Java programs, for Java web applications, called, well, there are a number of APIs, but the one we'll be working with most is the Servlet API. And the whole idea here is that there is a Java API that everybody can write their web applications against, everybody can write their servlets against, and then multiple vendors, for lack of a better word, most of them are open source these days, can provide a container in which that servlet can be run. So basically it's an implementation of that API that can then take your web application and run it and serve it up to people. What you need to know is a couple of things. There's something called Jetty, and that's the thing that runs your web server, that runs your servlet. And the way you invoke Jetty in Maven, Maven has great support for Jetty, is that you say Maven Jetty run. Now this only applies to project 5. You try to do this with project 4, I'll be like, what the hell is Jetty? Because it's not configured. If you go and look at the pom.xml for project 5, it's got a whole bunch of additional stuff so they can do Jetty things. Okay, a bunch of stuff scroll by on the screen. The first thing that you should notice, though, is that it didn't return. It's still running, right? So your web server is running over here in this shell on the right, and it's complained about a couple of things. But down here in the info, it's told you some things along the lines of, okay, it's running on localhost 8080, so port 8080. Just in case anybody doesn't know the whole notion of hosts and ports, right? So a machine running on the internet is known as a host. It's got a name that uniquely identifies it on the on the internet, and so this is the www.cat.pdx.edu, right? That is the name of a resource out there on the internet. And so the host name identifies the machine, and then in terms of communicating that machine over sockets, network sockets, there's an addressing scheme for every machine, which basically assigns numbers to ports. You can think of it as like a conceptual hole in the back of your machine. And sure, back in the old days, you'd actually plug wires together and stuff like that. But anyway, so the whole idea is that when you have a program, a program that wants to access the network, that wants to serve up information, that wants to sit there and listen for someone to connect to it, it opens up a port with a given number on the machine that it's running. And so then when clients want to communicate with it, they communicate with that program at a given address over a given port. Now, different communication protocols, network communication protocols, have ports they like to use by default. And there are standards wise that say, oh yeah, look, for HTTP, for instance, that's port 80. For HTTPS, that's by default port 443. you know, things like SMTP, the mail protocol, or what are some other ones that you might have, like FTP, if anybody still uses that, right? They have default ports. So really, whenever you communicate with another machine, you need to specify two things. Well, how to get to that machine. So either the host name of the name of the machine if it's on the internet, or the IP address to get it there on your network, and then you specify what port. And so that's why in URLs, you know, you might have seen the variation where you have the host name colon the port number to get to it. Actually, and let's just do that now. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to open up a new tab, and I'm going to go to HTTP, oops, not S. I'm going to say localhost 8080. So when I go to localhost 8080, it returns this content. It's telling me, well, error 404 not found because there is no content being served up by my Jetty on that port. Actually, if I control C my Jetty right now, it stops Jetty. Now if I try to reload my page, Chrome's like, nothing responded when I attempted to reach out to localhost 8080. So now when I run Jetty again, we will get that that same screen saying, hey, listen, there's nothing at the root of this web application, which is true. I haven't configured it to do that, which is fine. Okay, running Jetty. I'll reload again, and now I'm getting this. It's saying, hey, I couldn't find anything at this address, but you know, there's something called Airline. Do you want to look at that? Great. I'll click into that, and now I'm at the URL, you know, HTTP localhost colon 8080/airline. So this is my web application. So this is what the Jetty is serving up to me. When it receives a request for this URL, it returns this information here. This is actually an HTML page as part of the application, but I use it to demonstrate the app. To be clear, this is not part of the assignment unless you know, you really like HTML forms, like if you're familiar with that, you could use it to develop the assignment. They're better in other ways to do it. Out of the box, the Airline project isn't an airline. It's a simple dictionary program where you define words that have meanings, words that have definitions. And you can interact with this program in several ways. To sort of just give you a feel for how it works, I'm going to use this set of HTML forms because it's, you know, vaguely familiar to people. And so there are various ways you can interact with the application. So we'll see how to interact with the application through an HTML form. We'll also see how to interact with it through the command line. Later on, probably not tonight, but we'll return to this later. You'll see how to interact with it through unit tests and integration tests, things like that. So you can list all of the word definition pairs that are defined in the dictionary. So when I click Submit here, it goes to a different URL. It says, okay, airline/flights. So this is basically simulating. It's using the flights URL, but it's giving you the dictionary thing. There's nothing in the dictionary right now, so it turns in an empty page. There's nothing there. So I go back to the airline URL and get this form again. So now I want to create a new word definition, and I use the same ones every time. So I go and say doe, a deer, a female deer, and I'm going to create that. And it tells me, it goes to the airline/flights URL, and behind the scenes it did a post. We'll talk about that. And I said, hey, I defined doe as a deer, a female deer. Okay, that's nice. I'll go back to my form again. I'm going to say list all of the word definition pairs. Oh, look, there it is. It tells me it's doe, a deer, female deer. Right, so we're interacting with the web application through this HTML form, and what it's doing behind the scenes is it's making requests off to the servlet, and it's the servlet that's handling them and returning the appropriate content. Okay, let's add another one. Let's add Ray, a drop of golden sun. I created a new one. Now when I go back and I view all of them, both of them are there. Doe and Ray are there. And this is this airline flights URL with no query parameters. This one right here, you can ask for the definition of a word. So I want the definition of doe. It returns doe, deer, female deer. And look at the URL. The URL is localhost 8080/airline/flights !word equals doe. Right? So, and here again, okay. Have you all sort of like learned about like HTML, HTTP before? Is vaguely familiar? Maybe you've seen this kind of thing. You have to realize, like, someone of my age, like this was like cutting edge technology in 1996, and so like my entire career, I've like followed this. So like for me, it's just second thought about it. I figure maybe this is like maybe not so much new to you, but you sort of like didn't realize, or there was no reason for you to really understand what's going on underneath the behind the scenes. Anyway, so we format a special URL that has basically airlines the name of the application, flights is the name of the servlet, if you will, and then you can pass the you can pass key value pairs into the into the servlet, into the web via the URL, via the web request, to give it some more information. When you watch the Foundations of the Web lecture, I talk about how URLs are resources, basically, right? It's just like an address of something that's available on the web, and so that's what this is, right? It's a unique name, or it's a an address, and it's not just like what machine or port is running on. It's like, well, within that machine and port, within the service that's running on that machine and port, go find me some information. So here again, we're basically querying our flights. Our flights in this case are entries in a dictionary for the word doe. So all of this can be done through this web form. And I want to start here because I hope this is fairly familiar to you. Sure, it's like again 1997 style web programming, but I think you can see how this is similar to what you have in programs today. I'm going to put one more than a name I call myself. Great. And so now here in my application, I've got 3 entries in the dictionary. So one way to interact with the application via these URLs is through this web page. That's probably familiar to you. Now, oh, and and along the way, I forgot to point this out. I print out here. Let me make it a little more narrow here. Now we can see both of them on the screen. Let me go back here. Let's see here. Fa, a long, long way to run. Long, long way to run. So now when I click this here, you'll see that the server logged what it did. It said, there was a post request for fa, and it defined fa, a long, long way to run. So this is something I probably should have pointed out earlier, that as I do things here in the web browser, the request is being handled over here in the by the servlet in the web container running over there. Okay. So we use the web page interface over there. Also, there is a main method. Target airline client.jar is the name of it. So I have an executable jar here, which runs some Java code. And this Java code also interacts with the servlet and does the same things as that web page. And so here for the client jar, out of the box, you provide a couple things: a host and a port, and then optionally a word and a definition. So if I just say localhost 8080, again, it makes a request over here to the servlet to say get all entries, and it returns, well, basically that same information that we saw on the screen. But here's a Java program making those same HTTP requests of the server and getting the same results. It's basically doing the same things that the web browser was. And there's a lot of power to this, right? And this is what web applications and REST APIs allow you to do. It allows you to leverage HTTP, the World Wide Web, the internet, right? The way that data is shared today. And it lets you leverage all of that from a variety of different clients. So whether it is a web page, whether so a browser, from a small device like a phone, from an application like this, you can have like two servlets talking to each other. It doesn't matter because there's this very robust, incredibly well supported, really quite featureful protocol in HTTP. And so again, you can do things like get the definition of a single word, like dough. You can also try to get a definition of a word that doesn't exist, and it throws a 404 code. So here's another thing about HTTP. When you try to, so HTTP not only defines a protocol for communicating, it also defines a series of error codes to convey when things go wrong. So, for instance, here when I try to look for a word equals Bob, I get an HTTP error 404. If I try to then let's see here, I think does it do something bad if I say something like, oh, if I just say word equals nothing? Oh no, I guess it returns all of them. Okay, it returns all of them. If I say, I don't know, Fred up here. Nope, okay, I guess it returns all of them. I was trying to generate some other codes. I don't remember how to do that. Maybe once we look at the source code, I'll get a better idea. But anyway, so out of the box, this web application can do everything that you can through that browser. So that's the fundamentals. And you see how this program is very different, right? Yeah, you've still got command line, and so you got really good at writing command lines. But now it's like, oh, this over on the right is where you're going to need to focus for this assignment, really understanding the web application. Okay. Oh, I guess here's something. I can, we'll do it in the browser, it's a little easier to read. Great, so here I've got my dictionary, which is full of entries. And note that when I Control-C my Jetty server, and I restart it again, you'll see, and I reload the page, all my data is gone. So all of the data managed by this application, and the same thing for your project file, will just be stored in memory. So you won't be writing to files in Project 5. We've already demonstrated that you know how to write to files. No question there. So you don't have to worry about that. Instead, you will store multiple airlines in memory as part of the application. Not very real world, but that's okay. Because really, for Project 5, it's all about understanding the Servlet API and how to return information back to the client. Not so important to to persist the data. You've already demonstrated that you can do that. Okay. Here is in the assignment. Here's a diagram of what's going on. I'm gonna make this big so we can see the whole thing. There are various pieces, parts. Let's just look at the biggest boxes right now. So you've got your Jetty web container over here, which runs on local host port 8080. You've got your main class over here, or your browser or whatever, and these things talk to each other. And so then the client will send things like an HTTP GET request of a particular airline on to localhost port 8080, and the internet will deliver localhost 8080 over to this box over here, and then inside the web container, it knows how to route /airline/flights back to your servlet. And we'll look at our servlet shortly. Before we do that, though, any questions, or how did I do explaining sort of these fundamental concepts? Do you feel like you understand sort of the relationship between the two programs and feel okay moving on to look at the code? Yeah? Okay. Let's look at the code. Let's see here. I've got my airport name. Yeah, that's my code. There's Airline. I probably need to resync it to get those latest changes. Reload from this. Okay. We've got an airline web project, and it's still analyzing everything. I don't need airport names anymore. Let's take a look at the code that was added. We've got things like the .mvm directory again for the Maven wrapper. Let's look at source. This is where things get interesting. It's got some integration tests. It's got some main code, lots of main code. It's got some unit tests. We'll look at those in a little bit, maybe tonight. Here's all the main code. It's got a bunch of stuff. Oh, sorry, this is Airline. Jeez, I wanted Airline Web. That's the one I opened. Sorry about that. The same thing. Integration tests, some main, and some unit tests. Let's look at the main methods. Okay, I've been talking about this thing called a servlet. Let's dive into that a bit. So the servlet is a Java object whose methods get invoked when the web server, the web container, receives a URL. So again, back to this diagram right here from the assignment. When an HTTP GET arrives at the web container, its job basically is to parse this resource that's requested and then deliver it to the code that knows how to handle it. And if it doesn't know what code handles it, then it issues a 404 error or some sort of error and lets the client know about it. But in this case, when it receives a request for /airline/flights, it goes right to the airline servlet. And in HTTP, there are these various verbs like get and post and put and delete and head and things like that, that basically serve as, well, kind of like, you can think of it as well, they are methods on this object. So the whole idea is that depending on which verb you invoke the resource on or with, I guess you say, hey, here's the resource, like /airline/flights $airline equals airDave. And you say, well, I want to get that resource. So that's basically asking the server, hey, there's some information that has that, is known by that name, and tell me what that information is. So for instance, it was, what is the definition of doe? It says, oh, it's a deer, female deer. You can also use post to store information. And so then, again, I don't know if you've studied HTTP forums and things like that, but you've probably gone to some website where you entered in some information and it wasn't working. You try to refresh the page, and he's like, hey, and an error comes up or a warning comes up and says, hey, you're about to post some information again. Do you want to proceed? And I don't know if you click OK or cancel. It's up to you about how risk averse you are. Well, that is saying there's a different verb being used by the browser to interact with that particular resource. And so then we'll see, and the way this, I guess, is represented here is that the different buttons will do different things. The first two are gets, and the second one is a post because it creates new information at that URL. And then ultimately, again, these web requests are delivered to the servlet. So the servlet is Java code. So this is the code that you write. This is the logic that implements your REST API, implements your web service. And we'll just collapse things to make it easier to read right now. There are only a couple of methods here. There's a bunch of private ones. But here are the public ones that are interesting. Do get, do post, and do delete. So the responsibility of the web container, again, is to route that request to an appropriate object and method. And the object is your servlet. And you configure, you'll learn about it in the lecture. You basically configure your web application to say, oh, here's the servlet that gets served at this URL. And again, your GET requests will get routed to the to the do-get method, post request to do post, delete also to delete. And I tried to explain all of that here in the Java docs. So here's what I'm going to do to sort of help us understand this code. We haven't really talked about debugging in this class yet. And I've found that Project 5 is like a good time to talk about debugging. So I'm going to, we're going to show you how to use the debugger with this thing. I'm going to stop my Jetty server. Now, as I recall, I've got instructions in the getting started repository. Yeah. Over here in the Getting Started repository, I have a section of the README which is dedicated to the to debugging. There you go. How can I use a debugger to uncover the source of problems for my projects? I just want to spend a couple minutes talking about this. So the Java Virtual Machine has really nice debugging capabilities, and IntelliJ allows you to connect to a JVM and debug it. Now, I think everybody's used GDB here in their earlier classes, right? I'm sorry. Have you used a visual debugger, though, like in an IDE to set breakpoints and stuff like that? Yeah, a couple of people, a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to be doing that now, and tell me if I'm going too fast. I know it's an unfamiliar concept, but it's so much nicer than GDB. Oh my gosh! I mean, it's like, yikes. Yeah. Okay. So in order to, so the whole idea is that you have a Java program that's running inside a Java virtual machine, and you have a debugger of some sort. There are command line debuggers like JDB, which is kind of a crappy command line debugger for Java programs, but it'll do in a pinch when you can't get a better environment. But what we'll show is how to use IntelliJ to attach to a debugger so that you can set breakpoints, stop those breakpoints, and navigate the code. But there's this piece of magic that you need to do, and you need to add some command line parameters that are kind of wonky, and I'll show you how to do it in IntelliJ. And then if you're running a Java program, you use this -agentlib option. If you are running Maven, however, you need to set an environment variable called Maven ops and provide that information. So that's sort of preamble. Now I'm going to show you how to do it. So basically what I want to do here is I want to run my Maven, my Jetty via Maven as I normally do, but I want to run it in a mode so that I can attach a debugger to it so that we can set a breakpoint in my doGet method and we can step through it to see how all of that works. So the way to do that is the following. You go over to IntelliJ. Now, you've worked with this menu up here, right? This is how you run things. Like when you run your integration tests, you see these things. And I don't know if anybody went and tried to create a new, if you go in, if you go and edit configurations, I think a lot of you have seen this, right? You see a screen like this where you have all these run configurations. I don't know if anybody clicked the plus button, but there are all sorts of different kinds of things that you can run through IntelliJ, everything from like Cucumber test to like Docker images and Gradle and things like that. Oops, it's just getting kind of slow here. There we go. However, what we want is a remote JVM debug. So this is a particular configuration, a particular run, debug configuration for IntelliJ. So when you debug a JVM, the way that the debugger communicates with the JVM is over a socket. Now, we saw sockets for serving HTTP. That's at port 8080. Well, we can use a different socket, same Java virtual machine, to connect via the debugger. Right? Project 5 is all about distributed programming. You've got multiple programs that are all talking to each other. And so then, don't worry if it's getting, if it seems new or different for you. This is just, this is what we do in Project 5. This is like the big learner. So here in IntelliJ, we're going to create a new configuration. I'm just going to call it localhost 5005 because the port 5005 is the Java debugging port. Not to be confused with port 8080, which is the HTTP port. Let's see here. So it says great. It's going to connect to the JVM. So it's going to debug the JVM running on localhost on port 85. And by the way, I didn't say it. Localhost refers to this machine that it's running on, as opposed to a different machine like www.cs.pdx.edu. And so it tells you all of this, and you can do things like you can change the port. It actually will change the port eventually. And as you may notice, when I change the port here in this text box, it changes this string down here. I'm going to change it back to 5005. Because this is the magic string that ultimately you need to send to the that needs to be put on the JVM's command line when it starts up. So I'm going to copy that to my clipboard, and I'm going to do the following. Back on the command line here in this shell, I am going to set the Maven ops for Maven options environment variable to that value that I copied to my clipboard. It's this dash agent lib jdwp equals transfer blah 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 blah. I'm not going to go into the details of what that means. I think what's important for you to know is that this is the magic thing that you put on the JVM's command line so that it will that enables a debugger to attach to it over a specific port. That port again is 5005. Okay, so I'm going to run that here. Yeah. And so now let's set this environment variable. And Maven knows about that environment variable so that when it starts up the Jetty, and actually there you see it right there, it's listening for transport on port 5005. That means that it's ready to have a debugger attached to it. So now it's going to, it's going to start up and it's going to be sitting there waiting for a request. And actually I can then go add a new thing. Let's say doe, a deer, a female deer. Great, I just added a new thing there. Everything seems to be working. Now I want to attach a debugger to it via IntelliJ. So I'm going to save this run configuration. Again, this is localhost :5005. It shows up here. And now when I click the green debug, the green debug button, it will attach to the JVM. So does it say anything over here? No, it does not. But here, IntelliJ now has a debugger view down here, and it said, it connected to the JVM on localhost 5005. I'll get back to that later. Now here in my source code, what I want to do is set a breakpoint. You know what a breakpoint is in a debugger? The whole idea is hey, I care about what's happening in this line, so once you hit that line, stop the world so I can inspect things. The way you do that in IntelliJ is that you click in the in the margin here on a particular line, and you'll get a red dot, meaning that is a debug breakpoint. And so here I'm going to put one in my doGet. I'm also going to put one in my doPost. I'm just going to stop at the beginning of the method because I want to know what's going on here. So now I'm going to go. I'm going to go back to my my HTML form here, which I kind of like. Yep, I'm going to do a side by side. I'm going to have IntelliJ up right here. Oops, what's this one? I'm going to hide all that. Okay, here's IntelliJ over here on the right. I am going to list all of the word pair definitions in my appointment book. And remember, on the command line, I added doe, deer, female deer already. I'm going to click submit, and what happens? Well, IntelliJ wakes up, and it highlights that line that I set the breakpoint at because that line got executed. Okay, now we're in the debugger, and we can use IntelliJ to step through the code. So let's see what we've got here. So now we've got this debug panel that has popped up. And over here on the left, we have a big old stack trace, is what this is. These are all of the methods. Well, actually, sorry. It has a whole bunch of threads in the VM, right? You guys know about threads of execution inside a process, I hope. Right? The whole idea is that there's, multiple things happening all inside at the same time inside the Java virtual machine. And right now, it's stopped at this breakpoint, which is running in this thread, this QTP, whatever the hell. That's nice. And it's showing all of the code that's currently executing. This is the execution stack. This is the same kind of thing that you see in an exception, right? It's methods calling methods calling methods, and they have the execution stack. This is what's running in that thread. And right now, the debugger is stopped at my doGet method that's in my Airline servlet class. It's maybe a little bit interesting, but you can look at the stuff that's up higher on the stack, and you can see that it's all these Jakarta servlet classes and Jetty servlet classes and things like that. This is all of the Jetty code that ultimately calls your code. Because remember, going back to that architectural diagram that we had, when you get the request, it goes through all this Jetty code here in the Jetty web container before finally getting to your code. Okay. Now I want to focus in just on the method that's executing right now at the top of the stack, the doGet. Okay. So doGet takes two parameters, something called HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response. Those are two standard classes from the Servlet API. Right? Again, the architectural diagram. The Jetty code and the stuff in the Jetty code is all is somebody else's code, right? Some people at the Eclipse Foundation wrote that, but since everybody's programming to the interface, it can interact with your code. So what Jetty does is it takes the information that comes in from the HTTP client and bundles it all into these Java objects that are then passed to your method. So this is the interface that Jetty has with your code. So your code gets invoked, and it is provided with these two objects, one which is an instance of HTTP servlet request, representing the request information that comes in from the client, and the HTTP servlet response, representing the data that is sent back to the client upon completion of this request. And here in the debugger, you can see things about the request. So here's an object. I can inspect the object here, and it's got all sorts of stuff that, well, maybe this one's a little bit interesting and sensical. So there is an underbar URI instance field of that request object that tells you what the URI was, the URL. Is HTTP localhost :8080 airline flights, which is, actually, if we go back to the browser, that's, well, I guess it hasn't loaded yet, so we haven't seen that URL, but that's what's being sent. We can find out things like the method and the path. And gosh, I go into this lecture, you can get information about cookies and all sorts of other things like that. The content encoding, it's all represented as a Java object, right? So this gives you a Java API for working with the request that comes in from the client. Similarly, the response represents the data that you send back. And there's a couple of important pieces of information to send back. One is something called the content type. And this is, here is the format of the information that I'm sending back to you. So, I don't know, have you seen MIME types of things like text plain or like application PDF or, I think, no, okay, back in the day we used to see in emails all the time. Fair enough. The whole idea is that you need to tell the client, hey, I'm sending you this information and here's the format. It's like, oh, it's text. Oh, it's a PDF file. Oh, it's a JPEG. Oh, it's JSON, right? Because that way the client knows what the hell it's getting, right? And it can handle it, accordingly. So I mean, think about the client as a web browser, right? If you're going to send it, a PNG, you need to tell it as a PNG. So it says, oh, look, the data that I'm reading from this web server, that's a PNG. Great, I will render it as an image. So the first thing that you do in your get is you tell the response, oh, I'm going to be sending you plain text. So right now the debugger is on this line 34. And so I can, well, there's really not that much I can do here, but I can navigate through the code using these buttons down here. So there are, oh, anyways, execution point, that's nice, is it? Does that bring you back to the execution point? Oh, it does, that's cool. But there's a way you can navigate through the code. You can say step over, which goes to the next line. You can say step into, which is if there's a method that's called, it'll step into it. Step up will basically run to the end of this method and then bring you back to the calling method. And then run to cursor is, well, you can click someplace and say, hey, run until I get to that line. We're going to see examples of, I think, most of these here. But right now I'm going to use step over because I just want to go to the next line. So I click step over. The debugger ran a little bit of Java code, and then it stopped at the next line. Right? Hopefully this is a familiar concept to you from other debugging. Okay, so I've set the content type. The next thing I want to do is I want to say, okay, get the value. I want to call this get parameter method with the word parameter, which is just the string word, and then with the request. And so what this is going to do is get the value of the word parameter from the request. Here's where I want to use, and I want to look at what that method does. So I'm going to use the step into button from the debugger to then go into the get parameter method. Get parameter is a private method here of my airline server. And now I can look at more things. So here in the debugger, it tells me that the name, the variable of the value of the name variable, actually I can hover over it and it'll say, oh yeah, the value of that is word. And then here's my HTTP Servlet request. And the first thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to call the get parameter method of the request with that name. And so I'm going to then step over that. I don't want to step into get parameter. That's a bunch of servlet code. So I'm going to step over it. And it said, hey, on this line, the name name variable is word. The value it returned is null. Oh, right, because the value is not set. So on, remember, and it's been a couple of minutes, you might have forgotten, what I clicked was the list all word definition pairs, and there's no word for it to pass in. It just passes in. It doesn't pass in the word. And so then our code says, okay, well, nothing was passed in, which actually is fine. So I'm going to continue to step over here. This condition is satisfied because value equals null, and so this method is going to return null. Okay, now I'm back up in the calling method. I'm in do get. Right, we just completed this call to get parameter. And now the value of the word is null. And so then this call to if word doesn't equal null will fail. Actually, if you hover over it, it even says, oh, the value is false. Right, IntelliJ is really great about this. Right, it helps you understand what is happening in your code as it's executed. I love debuggers. So I'm going to step over this. And I go into the else branch because word was null. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to log, and this is just write to standard output. As a matter of fact, I can just dive into it, I suppose. And sure enough, just says system.out.println and logs the message. And so it's going to say the message is going to be get all dictionary entries. And so then, right now that's empty. And so then I'm going to step over it. And now, yep, get all dictionary entries. We just printed out. I'm going to log that, and now I'm going to call this write all dictionary entries to the response. Okay, I'm going to dive into this one and see what it does. It's another private method here. I suppose what I could have done is just run to a certain cursor point. But what this does is it prints out all the dictionary entries, right? The doe, deer, female, deer, all that kind of stuff. So how does it do that? Okay, now, when you write back to the client, you're basically writing over the socket to whatever requested it. And one of the things that I really like about the Servlet API is that they made what I think of as a very wise design choice. The Servlet API, here again, what does it allow you to do? Read information from some source and then write to a destination. It leverages the Java I/O APIs, the things that you learned about for Project 2, to not write to a file, not write to some buffer memory, but to write back to the web client. And so what you can do is from your response object, your HTTP Servlet response object, you can get a plain old Java I/O print writer, right? You've been using it for weeks now, right, to get something that you can then write back to not a file, not some other source, not standard output, but to the response, the HTTP response. So I'm going to get one of those as a plain old print writer. And, oh, it's thinking about it. Oh, did I dive into the code? I didn't mean to do that. So now this is a good opportunity for me to use the run to cursor. So I don't know, the debugger's off in La La Land someplace trying to debug some Org Eclipse Jetty code. I don't know, can I even get to that code? It doesn't even have the code for it. So instead what I can do is I can just click here and say run to this where the cursor is. Oh, good. Now I'm back in my code that I care about. And now I have a text dumper for this. You'll use your XML dumper, but now I have a text dumper in this project, and I can, just like your text dumper that you wrote, I'll just send that print writer to it. The fact that a print writer prints out to the HTTP server response is none of the business of the text dumper. It doesn't care. It's just writing up to some print writer. And then I will, let's see here, sorry, so just using the keyboard. I'll step over this, and I'll call the dump method on the text dumper, just like you would for your XML dumper. And I pass in a dictionary. So this dictionary is actually what contains, well, the dictionary, the definitions and stuff. And so here, this is a field of my servlet. And I can open it up, and sure enough, it's got one entry, doe, a deer, female deer. It's the thing I created before. I'm just going to send that off to the dumper, and what that does is it dumps the result off to the response and puts it in the body of the response, which is sent back to the client. So I'll step over that. And then the last thing we're going to do is another very important thing. Remember, the very first thing we did was we told the response, here's what type of content you're going to get. And then we wrote the content to it. And then the last thing that you really ought to do is you ought to set the status of the response. You say, hey, listen, I was able to successfully handle this, this request. And so now I'm going to send back a status code of SCOK. And SCOK is HTTP code 200. And of course, you could also, if there's an error or whatever, you can use 404 or whatever seems appropriate. So now I'm going to do that. I'm going to step over that code. And then that's it. I'm down here at the bottom of my do get. And I'm done debugging. I've already looked at all of my code. There's nothing else to do here. Everything up on the stack is like off in servlet land. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, not rerun, but resume program, which basically says, I'm done debugging for now. Go about your merry way. The debugger is done. Nothing happened over here. But now if we go back to my browser, oh, it finally returned doe, a deer, female deer. So that's everything that's happening in the background. And I use the debugger so that we could step through the code and see what it's doing. So that's how to use the debugger to explore, well, this particular code, but just code in general, right? For the case of Jetty, you want to run it with that Maven option that allows you to attach to the debugger, and then when you invoke the servlet by visiting a URL, it will stop there. So like for instance, now if I just want to do something different here, and then time for a break. When we want to look for the definition of a particular word, like doe, actually let's look for let's go through one more scenario, which is the definition of the word Fred. Now, this one doesn't exist, right? So when I click submit, I hit my breakpoint again. And let's just go a little faster here. I'm going to step over that to set my response. And I'm going to get my the parameter from Word, and that's going to be Fred. So Word is not null, so this is great. Now we're going to get the value of Fred. So we'll step over that, we'll log that. I'm going to step into this write definition. So last time we wrote all dictionary entries. Now we're going to write a single definition. Here's this code. So what does it do? The first thing it does is it looks up the definition of that word from the dictionary by calling the get method on dictionary. Right? Dictionary is just a map, a Java util map, and it has a get method that returns the value for the particular key. Now, our dictionary, as you may recall, has one entry, has doe, so it doesn't have an entry for Fred. So when we go to the definition is null. So look what we do this time. So now, the user, the client has asked for a resource that doesn't exist. We don't know the definition of Fred. And so what we do here is when we have a null definition, we set the status of the response to 404, not found. And this is a very HTTP thing to do, right? We leverage the HTTP error codes to provide an API that says, oh, wait, this thing wasn't found. The same way when you have a web page that isn't found, all it's really saying is like, hey, there's some resource that I don't know how to serve. So we're going to do this instead of printing out or returning the one entry. And then that's it. We have handled that request. And so we're going to continue along our merry way. And when we go back to our web page, we see we get a 404 because we asked for a word that doesn't exist. So that's your get method. That's how the get method works. How was that? That makes sense, I hope. I haven't been looking at the Questions? Oh, there are a whole bunch of chats. I'm sorry, I didn't see anything pop up, so I wonder what I missed. Okay, is it possible to change the port number? Yes, it is, and there's a little detail in the assignment about it. If you can't resolve some of the imports, is there some dependencies we need to add or something? You shouldn't need to add any dependencies. So do a couple of things. First of all, so before doing anything in IntelliJ, do a Maven clean verify. That will download all the jars that you'll need first. And then once you've done that, go back to your IntelliJ, and then go to the Maven tab over here on the right, and do a synchronize. The reload all Maven projects. I think that'll work for someone who isn't able to, who's like IntelliJ isn't happy with some of the imports. So do a Maven clean verify to, first of all, make sure everything can build from the command line, but what that will do is download all the dependencies you need, and then reloading the Maven project in IntelliJ ought to fix everything up. Let me know if it doesn't. Okay. See here, we're going until 8:30 tonight. Let's take a break. There's one more debugging thing I want to show you, but yeah, I think we need to pause. So let's take 10. We'll come back at 8:07. Let's dive back in and finish up. So in the first part of class, we've been exploring Project 5 all night. And we looked at the code, we looked at sort of how it works. I want to take a step back and actually talk about the assignment now that we've seen. So, okay, you've got these pieces parts, they talk to each other, you got this thing called a servlet. Here's what ultimately the project ought to do. So you'll have your airline servlet. Out of the box, it's that dictionary application. But for the project, you'll need to modify it to work with airlines. So it basically has a couple of URLs that are supported in the following ways. When you have an airline, when you have a URL with your host and port /airline/flights, $airline equals name, what it should do is it should, if you invoke that with a get, so basically the do-get method, that will return all the flights in the airline with a given name, formatted using the XML dumper. So again, your servlet hosts multiple airlines. If you hit that same URL, so the flights $airline equals name, with a post, and we'll see post here in a minute, that will create a new flight in that airline with a given name, according to the parameters that are passed in the HTTP request, like flight number, source, source, airport, depart, departure, airports. No, wait, source, depart time. Sorry, destination, airport, and arrival time. If you receive a post for an airline that doesn't exist yet, create a new airline and add the flight to it. So as you'll see, this is very familiar, very similar to what you did in your command line programs in projects 1 through 4. But now what you're doing is you're using this REST API, these URLs, to populate your airlines. There's a new piece of functionality, which is searching the flights of an airline. So here, when we invoke the airline/flights URL, with just an airline and a source and a destination, and with a get, that will return all of the flights in that airline as XML that originate at the source airport and terminate at the destination airport. So in addition to doing all the servlet stuff, you'll need to add some new capabilities, the ability to search for airlines that are, flights that go between 2 airports. And so another important thing to note here is that unlike previous assignments, this web application supports multiple airlines, right? Before, as with text files and everything like that, it was one airline per text file. Well, now you have multiple airlines in the application. So that's what you'll need to do with the airline servlet. And let's see here. I think it's maybe 2 weeks from tonight, or maybe 2 weeks from Monday, or 2 weeks from last Monday. I'll be diving back into this code base, and we'll see how to sort of start manipulating some things to evolve towards this application. But I encourage you to dive into it yourself. So that's the airline servlet. And then there's a command line program. What we saw there when we did the java-jar, there's also a command line program that interacts with the HTTP server. And this is what I'll use to test the HTTP server. And so it's got options and arguments, just like all the other ones have. And it should look familiar. You have the airline, the flight number, the source, the depart, destination, arrival, it's the project 3 and 4 arrival date time with the AM/PM format. And so it's got those requirements. So again, you are if you provide all of them, then you will create a new flight in the airline. But there's some options now. You have a dash host and a dash port for specifying the host and port of the server of the REST API to communicate with. You'll have a dash search option, which we'll see below, and then you have dash print and dash readme. Note that there isn't a dash text file anymore. There isn't a dash pretty. There isn't a dash XML file anymore. It's just these parameters. And some, for instance, you can't specify a host without a port. They're default values. Don't worry about that. So here's some examples of using the command line argument. This is how you add a flight to the server. So you would run your main method and provide it with dash host and dash port. Say here's the REST API that I want to invoke, and then you provided the information about the flight and the airline. So the name of the airline and then all the flight information, right? Just like we have in the other projects. Note that when the dash search option is provided, all you need to provide as arguments is the name of the airline and the source airport and the destination airport. And so then this will return, well actually this will print all of the direct flights that originate at PDX and terminate at Las Vegas. If there is no direct flight, then you should say so. Additionally, if you have dash search with just the name of the airline, it should print all of the flights in an airline. And those are really the primary cases. The command line parsing, actually, hopefully you're all saying, oh, yeah, this is easy now because you've been doing it for several weeks. So this is what the command line program does. And as always, there are some error conditions that you should be aware of. Of course, the command line is invalid, parsing the day and time. If you can't reach the server, you should have a nice error message. Or if there's something about the REST URL that the servlet doesn't like. I can't really think of much of a good example of that, but maybe there'll be something to convey there. So ultimately, that's the behavior that the program needs to have. What else can I tell you about that? Yep, it's a lot. We'll let it sink in over the next couple of weeks. And this is just more stuff that we're talking about here. Yeah, there's some more notes down here. I don't think there's anything I want to cover in much detail right now. Because what I want to do in the remaining time is I want to look at the command line program and how it works, and I want to debug that also. So what we're going to do is we're going to debug both the client and the server. The first thing that I'm going to do though is I'm going to detach from the debugger so I can run the command line program without having to worry about the debugger. So I'm going to go back over here and I'm going to run this again from the command line. I'm going to say ray drop of golden sun here. Oh, there it is. Good. It worked there. Now I want to debug this because I want to show you what the command line looks like. Now, earlier in class we created a debug configuration for port 505. Actually, I'm going to call this Jetty on localhost 505. Make it a little bit easier to understand. I'm going to apply that. Then we're going to create a new one, another remote JVM debug, and this will be for debugging the command line program, the thing on the left. Things are about to get a little weird because we're going to have like two programs being debugged at the same time in the same code base. It's going to be a little bit wacky, but I hope it makes sense and gives you an appreciation of the fact that you've got two Java programs running at the same time doing different things. So I'm going to call this command line. I'm going to call it what, main program? We're going to call it CLI for command line interface running on being debugged on localhost 5004. So this will be on a different port. It'll be 5004. And here, I want to say suspend equals yes. Well, yes, but I guess I can't really configure that very easily. That's okay. I will select all here and copy this. I'm going to use it as follows. Okay. When I run my Java program, I'm going to add that -agentlib thing to it. And there are all these these properties that you send to the debugger, things like, oh, here's the address that I want you to listen for a debugger on. I'm going to say suspend equals yes. What this does is that it will not execute the main method until the debugger attaches. And this gives you an opportunity to attach the debugger after the program starts running, or after the JVM launches, but before the main method is called. So note that when I run this, it starts up, it says, oh yeah, I'm listening for a debugger to attach on port 5004, but nothing's happened yet, because it's waiting for the debugger to attach before doing anything. Over here on the right, I said suspend equals no, which means that it started up, and because Jetty's waiting anyway for a web request, the JVM is running, the program is running. It's just that it's not doing much of anything. It's not doing anything interesting right now. Okay, so I've launched my command line program there. And now I'm going to do a couple of things. I'm going to get rid of this thing so I can see my computer. And I'm going to do the following. I am going to launch the, sorry. First of all, I need to go get the source code that I want to debug. So the source code is project 5. Here's project 5. Oops, I want this over on the left, because this is on the left, the left-hand terminal window right here. I'm going to have that code over on the left. As my main method. You guys have all seen main methods before. You know what a main method is. I'm going to set a debug breakpoint here in the first line of my main method. And I am going to attach to that program with on a port, the command line interface running on port 5004. I'm going to attach with that. And sure enough, by the act of attaching to it, then started the main method, and now it's stopped here right at the first line of my main method. Okay, so over here on the left, I'm debugging my main method, which is running on the left here on my terminal. Meanwhile, I'm going to also debug when reattach to my Jetty debugger. So now I've got two. Does that do anything? Not really. Oh, you know what? This still stopped? Yeah, it's still stopped. Actually, you know what? I realize I don't want this because I already have Ray drop the Golden Sun. I wanted to change when I control C that. Oh, actually, I'm not. I'm going to detach from the debugger right there. Did that run it? It might have. I don't know. I'm going to say me and name I call myself, just so we have call myself. Just so we have some different data in there. So I'm going to relaunch that. I need to reattach the debugger right here, not the Jetty localhost, but the CLI. I think it's getting a little confusing. Great. Now over here on the left, I'm debugging my my localhost 5004 again, right here in my main method. So let's walk through the main method. So I'm just going to, it's got some variables here that it wants to initialize for parts in the command line. Hopefully this is kind of familiar to you. I'm going to start using keyboard shortcuts so I can look at the whole thing. It's F7. Wait, F7 or F8 to go next? Well, I should know that. It's F8. Step over. So I'm going to step through all of this stuff here. I'm just parsing my command line. because host name equals null, then the arg is localhost is the host name. Note the syntax is a little bit different, but I'm just iterating over my arguments here to get my definition. As you can see, IntelliJ is nice enough to fill in the values of everything that was read, things like that. So now there's some error checking. If host name is null, then it issues an error. Well, it's not going to do that. So I'll just go through this. It's not missing a port string. It's going to parse the port string into an integer. Everything was cool there. And if I look at my debugger, now I can see that the value of all of my variables, including my port, this is all what I expect it to be. Okay, so I've specified all that information. So let's see here. If word equals null, well, it equals me, so it's not null. Definition equals null, nope. So here I am in, so I provided enough information for the command line client to create a new dictionary entry. So it now uses this object called the client. So the client here is, if I just go up to the declaration, this is an airline REST client. So going back to our architectural diagram, right here, Project 5 uses this class called an Airline REST client to actually make the connection. So I added this. So I added this Airline REST client in hopes of making it easier for you to invoke the REST API. You can learn about the the URL class and other things that I use to make the request. But many years ago, I had students do that, and it took too long, and it's not what I wanted them to learn. And so I provided this code to hopefully make it easier for you. So I'm going to now drill down into the implementation of that add dictionary entry. I'm going to step into this thing. Okay. What this add dictionary entry does is it invokes the servlet, right? It is the thing that then basically makes this connection, draws this arrow over here to our JD Web container. It's the thing that makes the HTTP request. And it uses this helper class, or helper object called HTTP request helper, and there's some more code that I wrote, to actually construct the HTTP request, make sure everything's encoded correctly. Again, things I didn't want you to deal with the details of. And basically what it does is and I guess we can dive into it. We'll dive into the post method here. It takes a map, and the map is basically the parameters that you put on the URL. So and this is my code, and it says, great, send an encoded request to the server with the URL string, and the URL string is localhost 8080/airline/flights. That was actually put together here when you create the HTTP method, or sorry, HTTP object. Yeah, so here you put together HTTP request helper with a formatted string that has host name, port, the web app, which is always airline, and the servlet, which is always flights. So it uses all of that and basically takes the parameters in the map. And if we go and look at the parameters here, we have a definition of a name I call myself and a word of me, which is exactly what we passed on the command line. So the reason that we have this Airline REST client separate from Project 5 is because they have very different responsibilities, right? Your Project 5 is all about parsing the command line. So that's what it should do, and it should do it well. Just focus on parsing the command line, and then delegate the responsibilities for interacting with the REST API with the Airline REST client. This not only separates responsibilities nicely, but it makes the code more testable because, again, it has limited responsibilities. So, I guess what I'll do now is I'm going to step over this call to send encoded request. So this will be the thing that goes off and makes the request of the servlet. Oops, I wanted to step over that. Sorry. I'm going to step out. Yeah, I'm going to step out of this method now. It's still sending stuff to the server. And look what happened over here. The debugger hit a breakpoint on the server. So I'm running, I have my one IntelliJ that's attached to two debugging, to two Java VMs that are being debugged. One is the thing on the right, which is the server, and one is the thing on the left, which is the client. So now it stopped at the breakpoint in my do post because my client sent a, actually if I go back to here, oh, interesting, it doesn't, if I pause the debugger, pause the program, it's in there reading on a socket, but it is in the post method of HTTP request helper because the code on the left, the client is making a post request to the server. I'll zoom that program back. Okay, now let's take a look at what's happening on the server side. So we looked at the do-get method before. This is the thing that will format the dictionary and send it back to the client. Now we're looking at the do post. And what does do post do? Well, it creates a new entry in the dictionary, and your program will create a new flight in the airline. Let's look at the debug output there, and let's just step through this one. So again, just like in the do get, we set the content type to be returned, and then we get some information. We're going to use that same get parameter method, and now the word is going to be me. The definition is going to be a name I call myself, and IntelliJ is nice enough to tell me all these things. And now I'm going to log the fact that I'm making a post between a word and a definition, and so we see that here in the output, me, a name I call myself. I add it to the dictionary, and then I put together a little message. So now if we look at the dictionary, actually let's look at the debugger here, debugger view, and we look at the dictionary. It now has three things. It has me, Do, and Ray all in there. And I'm going to format the some information about what was just added. I'm going to set the status to OK. And then I'm done on the server side. So I'm going to actually be done with that method. I'm going to continue on. I'm going to say, yep, I'm done debugging for now. Go do your thing. And now back over here, I'm executing this method again. It picked the debugger who's debugging the client, picked off where it left off. And now I'm just going to go on here to get my response object. And my response says defined me as a name I call myself. I have this very important method, which is throw exception if not OK HTTP status. I'm just going to dive into that real quick. This basically gets the HTTP return status from the client, from the server. So like we set SCOK over here, so that's 200. And sure enough, that's the code that we got back. If it wasn't 200, we would throw this REST exception. We're not going to do that in this case. We'll just keep going. And that was it. And so now we have we've successfully added the word to the dictionary. Back here in our command line program, we'll then print that message out, print out the message, define me as a name I called myself. And sure enough, it shows up on the command line as that. And now I'm done with my main method. I continued on, and my program exited. I'm back here at the prompt. So using the debugger, well, rather, what we just did was we used the debugger to walk through the code that comes out of the box in Project 5. And there's a lot here. But I think I wanted to show you this for a couple of reasons. I wanted to see the power of a debugger. And I wanted to get you thinking about the new dimensions of complexity that are here in Project 5. Right? You have these two parts of the program that talk to each other, not in the same program, but across the, across the wire, across the REST API. So I encourage you to go home, make sure that your Project 5 can be built correctly, that you can see it in IntelliJ, which looks like some people already have, and maybe go through some of these same steps to understand the lay of the land for this project. I think a little bit of orientation, understanding the code and how the various pieces fit together will help you go a lot faster on the project. Okay, that's what I have for tonight. There's another important part of this, which is how to test it, and I think I will maybe find some time over the weekend to record that and put it out there. It's not something you probably need, this week, because next week we'll be focused on mob programming. So on Monday we will do another operating theater activity where you'll watch people mobbing. So please, I hope people in the classroom will volunteer to mob with me, so we can all see what that's like. And then next Wednesday, I want everybody in class, or rather, I'm asking everybody to please be in class as we do our first mob programming activity together. Bring your HDMI adapters. Awesome. That's all I got for tonight. Anything else? No, it is time to go. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate your time tonight. I mean, just with the class in general. I know we got a lot going on, but we're getting through it. And more exciting stuff on the way. Hope everybody has a great weekend. Stay warm. And I will see you on Monday. Thank you.